Chair, sitting comfortably. Some have even had a special cup of coffee, I see. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for the extra coffee. Oh, here we are. More chairs around.
That's it, too late. So sharp. Good. I don't buy it.
Only for you and...
Well, thank you very much, everybody, and a nice full house. Many thanks, first of all, to Melanie for the excellent reception, including the coffee and the help round days out and getting us organised. Thank you very much to the headmistress, Miss Monique, for all the welcome, as always, at the Academy. And a great welcome to both the head and teacher, Miss Hen and Sean from Bellver. Welcome, and you with your team. This is the second debate in the second round of preliminary debates, which is to say you've all done one debate so far, and this was the second one before the finals of the second round. I don't need to remind you that today it's between Bellver and the Academy, but I would like to thank, as always, the sponsors who make it possible. Palmer Pictures, Imperial Properties, Ibex Insurance, Clinica, Ornella, and Ticket Travel. And of course to the Rotary team who found us eventually, Bev, Harry, and John and Ron. Thank you for everything. The Academy team today is Antonia Mateos Maros, is that correct? Andrea Anibana Soleil, and Vicente Sheila. More or less? Yeah. Right, and the Bellver team, Maria Gasco, Marta Salvo, and Mariona Fischer. The judges, the timekeeper today is Alison Tom. The judges are Carlos Besta, Gail Davis, and our spokesperson, Sarah Cornett. The motion today is quite an interesting one. Recreational drugs should be legalised. Recreational drugs should be legalised. After the toss, the team for the motion is the Academy. The team against the motion is Bellver. I don't need to remind you of the debate, the rules, but just keep in mind the bell there starts after 1 minute. Points of information allowed. After 4 minutes, no further points of information. 5 minutes is time over. And during the 2-minute summary, no interruptions are permitted. Okay? So, other than that, let's get on with the debate. Over to you, Alison.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the Academy were for the debate, so if you'd like to simply proceed, Antonia. Let me know when you're ready to start.
Do you know if I can move this for you?
Yeah.
Ready? A cup of coffee is the best way to start your day. I'm sure many of you agree with this statement. As I've seen this morning, some of you have even had some yourselves. But what might surprise you is that caffeine is a recreational drug. Recreational drugs are chemical substances that alter brain function and result in temporary changes in mood, behavior, perception, and even consciousness. And we've been using them since the dawn of the human race. During the Neolithic period, people experimented with opium from crushed poppy seeds right here in Spain. If recreational drugs are so intertwined within our society and history, why are we punishing those who use them? When instead, we could legalize recreational drugs and confront the problem head-on. Good morning, judges and distinguished guests. My name is Antonia, the lead speaker of the Academy. And today, my team will prove that recreational drugs should be legalized, with 3 strong arguments. I will start off by addressing how the underregulated drugs. Then our second speaker, Andrea, will give a historical example, the prohibition. And finally, our third speaker, Vincent, will say how drug-related issues will be addressed once recreational drugs are legalized. We hope Bellver feels welcome at our school, and we wish them the best of luck. Yes?
In your example, you mentioned how many drugs were previously used. However, there are many things in the past that have now been illegalized because we have found that they are harmful to our health. What can you say about this?
It's ingrained within our society. For us to take away something that is so deeply engraved by just making them illegal is not realistic. Thank you. Every time you use a recreational drug, you are increasing the risks of serious consequences, each use being a sharper and sharper scratch. This is because of the lack of regulation of illegal recreational drugs. Much like a balloon, you don't know what you're expecting. You're essentially playing a game of Russian roulette. Until it blows up in your face and you become aware of all the harms lurking from within. The problem with recreational drugs is not the drugs themselves, but how they are manufactured. The black market, which is the trade of substances outside of governmental control, which is similar to during the Prohibition era, which second speaker Andrea will be talking about, the secret bars during Prohibition that sold alcohol. The problem with these black market drugs is that they sell substances made by manufacturers that are amateur chemists. They have little to no experience, which, as you can expect, leads to problems and accidents in chemical composition. They also work in unsanitary environments with poor safety precautions, leading to the contamination of recreational drugs. The Urban Journal of Health found that 83% of street sample heroin contained harmful cutting agents and adulterants like mold and bacteria. In 2019, illegal drug vendors started lacing their products with fentanyl, an opioid 100 times more powerful than morphine, because it made their clients more addicted and it also reduced their costs. Yes?
Even in legalized regions like California, the issues persist with unlicensed dispensaries operating, illustrating the addictability of drug traffickers. So it still increases the number of drug overdoses in hospitals, for example.
Drug traffickers still exist, yes they do, but the minimized risk of what these substances contain has increased paramountly because people now know what they're taking in. They're not clueless about what's inside. May I continue?
Yes.
Thank you. How can we knowingly allow people to consume drugs that they don't know what's even in them and allow events like the fentanyl lacing to continue to persist? There's a clear alternative and solution that we can all take. Legalization of recreational drugs. They will have to go through the government and regulatory authorities like the Food and Drug Administration, making it safer for all of us to consume recreational drugs and only reap the benefits instead of the consequences. Thank you.
Legalizing recreational drugs might trigger an avalanche of addiction and public health crises that could bury society in an uncontrollable catastrophe. Good morning, honorable judges, members of the opposing team, and distinguished guests. I'm Maria Gasco, and today we're here to debate against the motion recreational drugs should be legalized. I will discuss regulation challenges and psychological consequences. Marta focuses on youth addiction, and final speaker Mariola highlights potential public health risks and the gateway theory. Breaking down the motion, a recreational drug refers to a chemical substance used without medical direction or supervision, taken for enjoyment or social reasons. And according to Cambridge Dictionary, legalization refers to a process of making something legal when it was previously illegal. Firstly, the difficulty in regulating drug production, marketing, and distribution is a significant concern that casts doubt on the feasibility of a fully regulated system. Even in legalized legalized regions like California, issues persist, with unlicensed dispensaries operating, illustrating the adaptability of drug traffickers. This adaptability and the ever-changing landscape of synthetic drugs and layers of complexity to a regulation process, as the lure of the black market, with its low prices and lack of oversight, remains a formidable obstacle in the path of regulation. It is also crucial to consider the difficulty in regulating recreational drugs if they were to be legalized. Enforcing quality control and age restrictions, as seen with alcohol, proves challenging. An ineffective regulatory system could lead to uncontrolled proliferation and increased harm. For perspective, alcohol misuse costs the US $249 billion annually, lost in workplace productivity, healthcare expenses, and criminal justice costs. Emphasizing on the struggle to regulate legal substances, mirroring the hurdles faced with legalizing more intoxicating and harmful recreational drugs. Yes.
The government is wasting all of this money on people who are using illegal recreational drugs. But if they were to be legalized, they could invest the tax revenue from illegal recreational drugs to better the situation and aid those with recreational drug misuse or drug use disassociation.
You're actually confusing because I'm giving an example of alcohol, an already legal drug. What you're inferring is that an illegal drug will cost more money. However, you would have to buy more needles, you would also have to buy more facilities to give these people these treatments, so it will actually cost more, as well as ambulance costs and healthcare costs. Then, on the second point, legalizing recreational drugs can result in social and psychological consequences, such as addiction, homelessness, reduced life expectancy, and decreased community safety. But I will mainly focus on two things: the workplace and comorbidity. Focusing on the workplace, the normalization of drug use may lead to absenteeism, decreased productivity, and higher risk and accident. For example, in here, you can see that the absenteeisms are way higher with workers with substance use disorders. And if you were a businessman, knowing this fact, who would you hire? Someone using drugs or someone who didn't? The answer seems obvious. And due to increased drug use due to legalization, there will be an increase in unemployment rates, which would also create a scenario where individuals find themselves unintentionally spiraling into financial pitfall. Then, comorbidity, the co-occurrence of multiple health issues, especially mental health disorders and substance abuse. Studies consistently show a strong association between substance abuse and circumstances like anxiety, depression, and psychosis. If recreational drug use becomes more widespread, it would exacerbate comorbidity, and the bidirectional nature of comorbidity suggests that the drug use can contribute to and result to a mental cycle of mental health disorders becoming worse and worse by time. This poses a substantial burden on the mental health services and resources, as third speaker Mariola will expand on. Also, mental health issues can get to a point of suicide. Each 40 seconds, somebody dies because of suicide, and half of them are due to a dependence on drugs. This means that by the end of this debate, 34 people will die due to suicide related to drug addiction. And from here on to the end of the year, 51,000 people. And by legalizing drugs, these numbers are guaranteed to increase. Can we endorse drug legalization for pleasure? Maybe it will lead to countless deaths and abortion and having blood on our hands.
Sorry.
Well done.
History. I remember that for most part of my primary learning, I couldn't understand why we learned history. Past is past, so why should I care about it? The first day of my secondary school, my history teacher started the class by asking us why we learned history. After some minutes of silence, as nobody knew what to say, the history teacher interrupted the silence by saying, If we keep on making the same mistakes over and over again, how are we going to advance as a society? And now I ask you, are we really going to make the same mistakes out of mere desperation, even if it will bring more harm than good? Most of us know about the infamous case of prohibition in the 1920s, yet where consumption of alcohol was banned. If we thought logically, this would mean that its consumption would go down drastically, right? Well, no. Actually, its consumption not only doubled, but almost tripled. Towards the end of prohibition, alcohol consumption increased to about 60 to 70% of its pre-prohibition level. Yeah?
But the prohibition was put in place because Americans in the rural areas wanted it to be banned. So it was made illegal because citizens wanted it to be.
Yeah, but in the end, we could see that it didn't work. So why are we going to illegalize it again if we have seen that it didn't work in the past? Thank you. The American government spent about $300 million trying to enforce prohibition. Yet gangsters like Al Capone managed to make 1/3 of that sum in only a year. The hundreds of millions spent during this period did not manage to decrease even by a fraction its consumption of alcohol. As a matter of fact, during the late 1920s, there were 32,000 secret bars only in New York City.
There are many new factors to drugs, such as synthetic drugs, which become more addictive than the former. According to Project OMO, there will be an increase in the drug use if we legalize them. What do you think of this approach, as history also has different factors?
Maxime will talk about that after. If this was only in one state, imagine how high the demand for alcohol actually was in spite of its illegal nature. Going back to my teammate Antonia's point, as we make recreational drugs illegal, they become more dangerous. As alcohol became illegal during Prohibition, there were no regulations on its production. This lack of regulation led to the selling of toxic, even poisonous alcohol, such as moonshine, to everyday civilians. If this happened about 100 years ago, what prevents us from thinking that now, with the thousands of new chemicals we have discovered, this will be different? For how long can we argue that the banning of drugs is to protect people when humans will consume drugs either way, and the ban of these products will only make people recur to more dangerous and addictive counterparts? We are all aware of the legalization of cannabis in the Netherlands, and due to the popular cannabis cafes and accessible marijuana, we might think that this use of recreational drugs made the demand increase. But actually, according to the European Monitoring Center for Drugs and Drug Addiction, only 5.4% of Dutch people make use of cannabis, and compared to the average of 6.8% in Europe. Although this difference might not seem huge, the Netherlands has the certainty that the people using the drug in this country are doing it with a regulated variant and will not be laced with other drugs that the consumers are not aware of. We will never be able to stop people from consuming drugs. They have been present throughout history and will not cease to exist in the foreseeable future. However, we have been taught by historical events such as Prohibition that the illegalization and the criminalization of recreational drugs' only achievement is for people to look for alternatives that will be less safe, less regulated, and more addictive. By legalizing all drugs and looking at the abuse of these substances as a health issue, like my teammate Vincent will expand on later, rather than criminality, the number of drug-related incidents and demand for the drug will decrease. Thank you.
Legalizing drugs isn't the way to get rid of the problem. Legalizing drugs only makes the problem worse. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, judges and opposing team. My name is Marta Salva, and today I'll be debating why recreational drugs should not be legalized. I'm sure you already know the consequences drugs have on consumers, but do you know the effects on young people? Shockingly, a total of 8.7 million children live with parents that abuse substances. The data here indicates that about 1 in every 8 children in the USA, aged 17 or younger, are residing in homes with at least one parent who has a substance use disorder. Do you think that legalizing drugs will help these numbers go down? I don't think so. Even more shocking, do you know the consequences this has on them? Well, studies show how parents who abuse drugs before or while having a baby can result in blood defects, attachment problems, and drug-affected newborns. A baby whose mother used certain drugs while pregnant may suffer from long-term problems due to growth failure or blood defects involving the brain, the heart, the kidneys, and intestines. Infants exposed to drugs in the utero have an increased risk of the sudden infant death syndrome. Plus, when children are being neglected by their parents due to parental substance abuse, development problems often arise, such as speed delays, malnutrition, and cognitive functioning issues. Kids whose parents struggle with addiction are more likely to experience their own challenges with anxiety, depression, and addiction itself. Would you say that legalizing drugs will help all these children? I don't think so. Youth is less likely to use addictive substances if their parents are early and often about their risk, establish clear rules and consequences, and regularly monitor their activities. Do you think this is the case with these 8.7 million children? Even more shocking, family studies suggest that as much as a half a person's risk of becoming addicted to nicotine, alcohol, or other drugs depends on their genetic makeup. From careful studies, scientists estimate a person's genetics that influence addiction account for 40 to 60% of the probability of them becoming addicted. And while genes are not the sole determinant, for example, environment also plays a huge role, a person will become addicted if their parents, a person is 8 times more likely to become addicted if their parents have a substance use disorder. So these 8.7 million children are 8 times more likely to become addicted because of their parents, because of their genes and their environment they grew up in. Do you think that legalizing drugs will help all this from happening? I don't think so. But there is still another factor to this equation, and it's something I've learned during the years, the domino effect. When one person does something, most times others follow, especially during adolescence. Do you think this does not apply to drugs? Adolescence is a period of time when you want to experiment and try new things. So what guarantees you that adolescents will not try drugs if they are legalized? Do you think legalizing drugs will prevent youth from consuming them? No, of course not. Legalizing drugs will have the opposite effect. Legalizing drugs will only incite youth to try them. 50% of American teenagers have misused a drug at least once. To conclude, I would like to emphasize how this becomes a cycle that never ends. You are born in a family with at least one of your parents being a substance use disorder. Domino effect, you fall into them, you become addicted, you become that parent. Then your kids have the domino effect, they become addicted, and they fall into drugs, then they become the parents. So this becomes a cycle that never ends. Is this a future you want people to have? This vicious cycle is very hard to break, and legalizing drugs will only make it even harder. Thank you.
Our world is suffering from the impacts of drug abuse. In 2020 alone, 284 million 15 to 64-year-olds use these harmful substances. That is not only an immense number, It's a devastating increase of 26% from 2019. If we're not able to radically change the way we view this complex health issue, if we're not able to legalize drugs and therefore able to communicate with those who suffer directly and offer treatment without consequences, these numbers will continue to rise and rise, eventually becoming unmanageable to recover. 75% of drug abusers who receive treatment are successfully sober for the rest of their life. That is a testimony to how we're able to help and treat those suffering with addiction. Sadly, only 1 in 7 receives this vital aid. Why, you may ask? I think the answer is obvious to most of us. Up to 7 years in prison and an immediate fine. That is the penalty for possessing Class A drugs in the UK. Class A drugs include heroin, LSD, and mushrooms. And that's not even producing or selling drugs, which has a much higher penalty. These men and women, they stand before a horrific choice. They can either seek help with their addiction, not only risking up to 7 years of their life in prison and an unlimited fine, they are risking their future. They are risking their goals, all of the future education and jobs they want to pursue. That will become much harder to achieve because of the criminal record that is associated with possessing drugs. Allow me to ask you this. Would you voluntarily seek help after what I've just told you if your entire future plans would disappear? Treating such complex health issue as a severe criminal activity, as we see it today, denunciates these men and women that still have a very bright future in front of them, that can still make a new start and live a fulfilling life. In our society today, drug abuse is far from being talked openly about, with the reasons why they've been used in the first place often hidden. If we're able to legalize drugs, we're able to communicate with those who suffer directly. Yes?
Drug abuse of elders is due to wide availability of overprescription of certain medication. Wouldn't it be better to, instead of legalize, we educate professionals?
You're saying that in decriminalizing drugs, you've also talked a lot about the health issues, but there have been a lot of different studies that have shown, such as in Orlando or in Portugal, that the numbers decrease if we use legalizing drugs, and all of the money that is now being spent on trying to pursue the idea of criminalizing drugs and trying to enforce this can be used to help those suffering addiction and therefore be able to help more people. But coming back to my point, if we're able to communicate with those who suffer directly, our entire knowledge of why drugs have been used in the first place will expand. Our ability to understand what really happens with the human body when drugs are used will immensely increase. Especially the children and teenagers who still have the whole life in front of them will thank us for the improved education and treatment that we are able to offer because of the new information that we have when legalizing drugs. If we're able to legalize drugs, we're able to reach a much larger population. We're able to educate more and more people about the dangers of drugs, and we're able to if concluding, we can see that by legalizing drugs, we're not only able to help those suffering with addiction, we're not only able to provide treatment without consequences, we're able to communicate with those who suffer directly, we're able to communicate with the families that experience the dangers of drugs each and every day. These people that walk down the dark path of drugs, they don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. They just see the drugs and they're in that sphere. We are the people who have to get them out of that. We are the people who have to support them the entire way. And that is going to become much, much harder if we continue criminalizing the use of drugs, because these people will be close themselves more and more from society because they feel the danger. Okay, thank you.
fellow judges, opposing team, and members of the audience. I am Mariola, and I stand strongly against the motion recreational drugs should be legalized. And today I will tell you why most of the European countries stand with me. Legalizing recreational drugs would not eradicate the problem. It would, in fact, only make the problem worse. There is a reason why recreational drugs are not legalized in most countries. Guess what country consumes the most prostitution in Europe? It's Germany. Germany consumes the most prostitution in Europe. And why, you may ask? Well, in actual fact, prostitution is legal in Germany. According to The Guardian, the sex trade in Germany has increased dramatically since prostitution was liberalized in 2002. The same would happen if recreational drugs would be legalized. As you can imagine, legalizing drugs would not eradicate the problem or decrease the amount of drugs being consumed. However, the drug consumption would increase because of the legalization. Thanks to the legalization of prostitution, some rules have been set in place which are supposed to make it safer compared to other countries. However, it's still extremely difficult to find illegal prostitution and therefore fine it. Just because rules are set in place doesn't mean that it isn't happening. It would be the same for drug legalization. Just because there are places where the drugs can be consumed safely doesn't mean that new businesses will be made where those drugs can be consumed for cheaper prices and in unsafe environments. Legalization would make drug consumption more socially acceptable and attract more people to the drug consumption. This is why legalization wouldn't decrease the amount of drugs being consumed, but it would actually increase. We can't forget how legalization of recreational drugs often serves as gateways to more potent and more addictive substances.
Point of information.
Yes.
Are you aware that Dr. Hart from the University of Columbia, who is a drug abuse and addiction specialist, disproved the gateway theory?
Well, actually, I have here some statistics that will disagree with your point, and I will tell you now. If we think of recreational drugs as a stepping stone towards dangerous abbeys, when we legalize recreational drugs, we pave the way for people to take that step. As you can see in the graph in front of you, it shows how starting with one recreational drug, in this case marijuana, acts as a gateway to more addictive and health detrimental substances. Let's take caffeine as an example. How many cups of coffee, how many of you started needing only 1 cup of coffee to get through the day and now you need a minimum of 3? Okay, well, I'm sure that the first time you had a coffee with milk, it felt like you would be awake forever, or at least for the whole day. However, now it would take at least 5 espressos to get through the day. The same would happen with recreational drugs. The more you take one recreational drug, the less effect it has on your body, which requires you to take more doses just to get the same high. Furthermore, drug legalization can lead to increased healthcare costs, as the consequences of drug abuse and addiction are often shouldered by the public health system. In jurisdictions where recreational drugs have been legalized, such as certain states in the US and some countries in Europe, there have been noticeable uptake in emergency room visits related to drug overdose. For instance, in Colorado, a 30% increase in marijuana-related emergency room visits increased after legalization. These statistics underscore the potential consequences of making recreational drugs more accessible. By legalizing recreational drugs, we risk normalizing their use and potentially leading to higher rates of addiction. This in turn would contribute to the growing demand of addiction treatment services, putting an additional burden on the public health system. The societal costs of rehabilitation programs, counseling, medical interventions for those grappling with substance abuse would inevitably skyrocket. Overall, recreational drugs should not be legalized because it attracts more people trying recreational drugs, not that, but actually trying even more health detrimental substances. And last but not least, it would exacerbate the burden on our public health system. And as I thank you.
Okay, so Susan, can you go first?
While proponents of drug legalization argue that potential benefits, it is crucial to consider the opposing viewpoint. Critics emphasize the potential for increased substance abuse, public health risk, and the strain on societal well-being by legalizing drugs. A current motion in their argument is history. The legalization of substance in the past doesn't automatically make it suitable argument for its current legalization. Circumstances, societal values, and scientific understanding change over time. Historical legality doesn't necessarily address the present concerns that are here. Also, advocates for legalization should consider this current evidence rather than relying solely on historical precedent as a robust argument of the contemporary legalization of a substance. Then third speaker talks about Portugal. Well, in this photo is where various children play. It is infested with needles that are used for recreational drugs. You use it as a good example, but we see an increased number of waste not being used efficiently. Then, if we legalize drugs, there will be difficulties in regulation, social and psychological consequences, and there will be more users using these detrimental drugs. You have to keep these 8.7 children in mind. Also, whilst both sides on this debate have shared goals such as health and well-being, reducing addiction, minimalizing crime, and responsible use of legalizing recreational drugs, legalizing is not the correct approach. These days, in Portugal, it is forbidden to smoke tobacco outside a school or a hospital. It is forbidden to advertise ice cream and sugar candies, and yet it is allowed for people to be there injecting drugs. Said we more in that course matter, we normalized it.
That legalizing drugs will not eradicate the problem. And we cannot completely eradicate the problem. This will continue until always. But it is not about eradicating the problem, it's about controlling the problem. And you always talk about health issues. And I think there is a higher problem of health issues if it is illegal and drug dealers can mix with rats and they mix everything inside a drug and they don't know what they're having. But if people are going to have drugs either way, isn't it better that they have drugs in a regulated way? If we legalize it, we are trying to confront the problem, to find measures, to make the situation better. But by illegalizing it, we just hide the problem in just for it being a crime. And drug is about a health issue, not a crime. Thank you.
So this is our chance to ask you some questions. So I'll kick off the debate with the question I always ask. You had to prepare both sides, for and against. So did you get the argument that you wished you wanted to support or not?
No.
No. So you wanted to argue for the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah? Did they nail it?
Yeah, they were.
You've been very kind. Well, tell us the truth.
Yeah, I mean, they also had similar argument that we were going to use.
I had the same argument for
Yeah.
prohibition.
That's why I was I was looking at her all the time.
I had the same exact argument.
Okay. So you struggled. So you're happy with yours. And how did they actually know what you were going to say if you lost the toss and gone the other
We
way?
had very similar arguments.
Similar arguments. Okay. It's interesting though. So you all think that drugs should be legalised?
Yes. Well,
So I'm not to tell you parents.
the points are better before.
Are they? Okay. All right. I liked your comparison to prostitution. So, wow, that's drugs and prostitution.
It was very good.
Does any of you guys have any questions, please?
Is there less crime when it is legalized or not?
Drugs.
Yeah, drugs. Is it
Well,
if it is not legalized, it goes to the black circuit, yeah, the black market. When it is legalized, it's not on the black market, and it's
yeah.
the crime,
Yes.
the gangs, and
Crime would decrease.
Well, marijuana, as you know, has been legalised in Canada for a few years now, so whenever you travel across the border, there's big signs, don't take it into the States, you'll be arrested. And there's shops everywhere, just like selling on any commodity. The interesting thing is alcohol is controlled by the government, so you have to go to a government shop to buy liquor, and you go to the beer store to buy beer. You can't get a bottle of whiskey and a beer at the same place. You have to go to different shops that are run by the government. But it hasn't stopped the legal sale of marijuana because it's not taxed. The government's taxed it, so it's actually more expensive in the legal shops. So they're still buying it.
But also, like, taxpayers have to pay for prison infrastructures because there's overcrowding in prisons. So you'd have to pay more to keep more people. So by legalizing these drugs, you'd also reduce the amount of people in jails. So you would reduce the overcrowding, and people will be able to live in human conditions in the prisons without having to release violent inmates.
But, for example, I traveled to Netherlands 2 years ago, and they literally offered me marijuana, which I'm a minor, and in whatever place you went to, they offered you drugs. There was no type of control. So if you legalize them, you would allow young people to take drugs without the need of...
But isn't the Netherlands, haven't they legalized drugs there?
Sorry?
Haven't they legalized
Yeah,
drugs?
exactly. That's what I mean. That
Oh.
as they have legalized drugs, they're selling it to everyone, no matter your age or whatever, without them asking any further questions. So you went around and they literally like offered you like brownies with marijuana or things like that to 14-year-old people.
One of the big questions is, you talked about the words, both of you, about control. And the only way you can control it is if you're breaking the law and they take it that way and look at the whole case. What do you think? How else would you get to the solution without control?
I think that you should approach like drug consumption and possession, not in a punishing way, but in a way of healing, because most of the times it is a mental disorder. So you cannot treat it by, putting these people away for a jail, but the selling of drugs to actually label it as a crime, so that people that produce these drugs also are affected. And also, like, the use of synthetic drugs make them more addictive, so there are more substances being made.
Yeah.
So by reducing like the resources given to these drug trafficking people, by making like governmental institutions, will decrease the amount of money going to that research and instead like to education on drugs and stuff like that.
I think the focal point that you're making is decriminalization, because the main aim of that is not to punish those who have drug possession or usage. Instead of putting them in jail, they give them a fine, and if they have an alternative to not pay the fine, like maybe you don't have enough financial stability to pay that fine, so you can seek help and then you don't have to pay that fine. And that's like one of the cases where there have been the most positive effects. It's not progressed as rapidly for obvious reasons, but it is the most effective.
In Boston, in America, they were faced with a very big problem. And what they did, they got the drug people together and said you can deal 2 days a week in 2 certain streets to serve your goods. But what we want you to do is, before we arrest you, is that you sell something as a substitute as well as the drug. So someone could have drug A, which is the cocaine that they wanted, but there will be a substitute which would be group B, and they could take that and learn to get off. I think people need to look at something like that, because it is an industry which we come back that's unregulated, isn't it?
But I think that if someone drug addict wants to overcome addiction, they have to do it themselves. So they have to go to those clinics where that substitute is actually given. But I don't think that's something that the government can make them do or regulate.
So here's a question for you then. Looking at alcohol, which is regulated, it's a drug, it's regulated. If you get addicted to alcohol, it must be very difficult because everywhere you go there's alcohol. So if you legalise drugs, would it not be that much more difficult for drug addicts to get off of it? It's a question, I don't know the answer.
I also think there's a problem with alcohol because alcohol is considered as one of the most dangerous drugs there are, but people, because it's been legalized for so many years, people don't actually see how harmful it is. So if we legalize recreational drugs, could it end up in the following years in people not being aware of the actual danger of recreational drugs?
It's also connecting to if you legalize drugs, you're creating an industry, and these industries, what's their main goal? To turn a profit. So they're counting on you to think that taking drugs is no big deal, and they're promoting that. Like with tobacco, they had what was it? They had these cartoons where there was the Camel cigarettes, where he was flying an airplane, which is totally unrealistic, but they were making it to look as if it was harmless, so that you would invest in their business.
Well, that's not, so tobacco is a highly regulated drug, but I don't see a lot of young people smoking, or you're doing it somewhere where we can't see you doing it.
There has also been an implement of vaping, and also I was looking at a graph when I was in the debate. So smoke rate went like this and then down, whilst vaping started in here and it went up. So in total, you had more vapers and smokers than smokers in the past by percentage rates in the whole world. So therefore, the problem has shifted to another cause because there was a creation of a new way to get this done.
So would that also happen if you put an alternative to cocaine? Would the same thing happen with vapes?
Yeah, I heard that they say that now people smoke less, but I don't think that's true. I see loads of young people now smoking cigarettes, loads, yeah.
Getting back to the alcohol thing, there's a very big development now with drinks that are non-alcoholic, and the biggest growth in the marketplace is that growth. So I think people are beginning to understand the dangers of it, which I think is very encouraging. This is where I come back with my drug solution, saying don't have the cocaine A, try the B to get off.
To all the teams, do you think that recreational drugs should be legalised in Spain? And why do you think yes or no?
I think yes. I also think yes. Do we have
a particular reason for that, or?
There would be a strong culture shock for everyone, though.
Yes.
Massive.
I think there would be a peak and then it would go down again.
Yeah.
Because it will be something new and then people just get used to it. Because it's like everything. If there's a little kid and you give them a toy or something and say you can't touch it, you can't play with it, they will want to play with it. It's like people want what we don't have. If you're brunette, you want to be blonde. If you're tall, you want to be short. it's always works like that. So I think if in human race, if you tell someone you can't do so much. There's something, they are just going to want to do more. So if we legalize it, I think at the beginning people would go to it because it's something new, but then it's so accessible that people would just see it as normal.
But with alcohol, they legalized it for a long time ago, and it's still like in the boom, as in lots of people are still consuming it.
But it's way less than compared to when it was like illegal or when it first became legal.
But also there are like various neurological factors. For example, perfumes have a higher concentration of alcohol now, and that also like impacts neural receptors in the brain, which make you like in turn more addicted to potential use of alcohol. And also, like, what was my point? Also, like, there's an incremented like places where you can buy alcohol, like restaurants and stuff. Like, you wouldn't buy cocaine in a restaurant. So, if you legalize it, you should like do special places with no signs, so that people will know where to find them, but they aren't attracted. Like, if you put like, you know, the pharmacy signs which are all like with the lights and stuff and neon, and it's like, I will go there. Instead you do like a building or a facade with no signs, and that will just indicate to the people that are already addicted that they can go there as a safe space, but it doesn't attract a larger audience.
Wouldn't that create problems with people like faking it, since there are no real signs that could like be a serious issue for people? Like, imagine you're 21, you're not that old, you can start having drugs depending on when they're legalized, like with alcohol. And they tell you have to go to this specific spot. What if that's internet phishing and it's not true?
Well, I couldn't use this graph during the debate, so there's actually like low dopamine D2 receptors when you consume drugs. So if you do a neural scan, you could actually check if that person has actually been consuming those drugs.
No. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how you posed that maybe you have buildings that don't have any signs so that it doesn't attract customers.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that pose a threat to people, because there could be illegal vendors because there aren't any signs, it's more secretive. You can say, no, don't worry. It's, I'm not talking about the neurotransmitters.
Actually, no idea.
So one last question from me. This is your second debate
Yeah.
for all of you. Was it easier the second time?
Yeah.
And did you pick up on what other people do? So a lot of props, you know, you scratching the balloon and stuff like that. So if you watch what other people have been doing and put it in your presentation, or how did you get to this point?
Actually, like when I started the debate, I did like a little like comparison with an avalanche, and I copied that from her because I saw her debate, and she was talking about like a candle and how the smoke will cover the true motive, and I was like, whoa, I need to incorporate this in my debate. So yeah.
I have to say, I thought Vincent was very good walking up and down, and he didn't look at his pad at all. He was just, you know, telling it like it is. Very good, Vincent. Very casual.
Have you all won one debate before?
Yeah.
So great. So should be a good. You're all sitting there wondering what the judges are talking about now, trying to work out. And you're all going to be at Palmer Pictures for the final. You're all coming to the
Do
final.
you know when the date for the final will be?
Yes, December the 14th. December the 14th. So all of you English is the second language.
Yeah.
So the reason I had to ask that question is, I couldn't tell. I couldn't tell that English is not your first language. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And what is your first language?
Spanish.
German.
Spanish or
German.
German?
Spanish.
Spanish.
I'm Spanish.
Really?
Sure.
My dad's German, but German is not my first language.
Okay.
Spanish.
Spanish.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fantastic. We had I asked that question at one of the other schools a few weeks ago, and one of the debaters, the reason I asked the question was he was struggling on an English word, he couldn't remember what the English word was.
Chef has made some cake and some fruit, so I'll bring the cake and fruit in here, and then anyone who like a juice, a coffee, or water can help themselves to that here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sorry, you want